In this video, I'm going to share with you an idea in the Budapest Gambit. And the game went d4, knight f6, c4, e5. Typical Budapest Gambit line, d takes e5, and here my opponent played knight e4, which is a move that's played at the club level, but it's not as popular as the main move, knight g4. So anyway, knight e4, and here this was an online friendly blitz game, so I wasn't in any mood to try to refute this setup. I simply played a very simple move, e3, which doesn't claim to be anything special, and white just says, okay, you can have your pawn back, I'm just going to move my pieces out and see how the middle game goes here. So knight c6, and now knight f3, bishop b4 check. This is all pretty standard for this line. And now almost everyone in this position plays knight d2 to block this check, and seems very obvious. But in this game I certainly had an inspiration, and I saw the position and I was like, why not king e2? This is a crazy idea, but the point is, if black now goes queen e7, trying to attack this pawn with the queen and the knight, then white goes a3, and suddenly this bishop on b4 is trapped. If bishop a5, then simply b4, bishop b6, c5, and if bishop c5, then same thing, b4, bishop b6, c5, and the bishop is trapped. So that's the idea behind king e2. Now you may say, okay, why king e2 for that? Why not in this position after the check, knight d2, and then he goes queen e7? Why can't you try that same idea here in this position? Well, the difference here is now black can take a piece, bishop takes d2, and that way he saves his piece. When the king is instead on e2 and the knight on b1, there is no bishop takes d2 move in the position. So that's the subtle idea behind this king e2 move. So okay, king e2, and my opponent paused a little bit here. This was a 3-minute 2-second blitz game, so it's relatively quick, but he paused a bit because he probably saw this move for the first time, and it's not a move that you'll find in the database. I was surprised that no one's ever tried this, and probably not so surprising because, well, it's a ridiculous looking move, and why would anyone make such a move? So my opponent castled, which is correct, and I played a3, bishop e7, and now I played b4 with the idea of playing bishop b2, strengthening this pawn, and I'll figure out how to develop this king side here. So b4, and my opponent really couldn't figure out a way to find a plan for black in this position. He quickly went wrong, and he played a waste of a move like a6. And I played bishop b2. Then he goes rook e8 here, which is again a waste of time. Maybe his idea was to go bishop f8, g6, bishop g7, and then attack e5. But this is extremely slow. And as the game went, I simply went queen d5 here, and attacking this knight, and had to move. So knight g5 takes, bishop takes, f4, bishop e7, king f2, and I managed to solve the problem of my king. And now my bishop can come out, my rook can come out to d1, and these queenside pieces are completely fine. So I went on to win this game from this position. But clearly, this plan that black tried in this position of trying to regain the pawn on e5 clearly didn't work out, and this is where black had to be a little more flexible than he was in this game. So let me show you the correct way to face this king e2 idea. So let's go back. So in this position now, with the pawn on a6, and castles is correct. And after a3, bishop e7, b4, black should re-evaluate the position and see where his advantage lies, because normally black's play is based on winning this pawn on e5, but in this position it's not feasible to do that, and black should instead ask how he can improve his own position and exploit the fact that white's king is stuck on e2, and these pieces on the king side are not coming out as quickly. So the correct response for black is to play d6, giving back, giving up a pawn and saying, okay, white, you can have an extra pawn, but I'm going to move my pieces out really quick, and then you're going to see problems with this king that's stuck on e2. So let's say if white goes bishop b2 like he went in the previous game, then simply d takes e5, and now here white has to trade queens before capturing on e5. If, for example, knight takes e5, then queen takes d1 check, and after king takes, we see that knight takes f2 forks the king and the rook. So for that reason, in this position, white has to take the queen, and after rook takes d8, only now white can take on e5. Black ignores the knight. Black just goes with his development, bishop e6, attacking the pawn on c4, which shows how flexible black's position is. Black doesn't really worry about this tension between these two knights here. And now if white captures on c6, we'll see that line, but let's see what happens if first he goes king e1, trying to add an extra support to this pawn, because black's really threatening knight takes, bishop takes, and then bishop takes c4 with check. So king e1, adding a support to this pawn, and now black shows his idea with knight takes b4. Really embarrassing for white, because now after pawn takes, bishop takes check, king e2, here it comes, f6, kicking this knight. And if this knight goes back, say f3, then bishop takes c4 is just mate in the position, and that's really, really sad. So instead of moving the knight, if knight d3, same thing, bishop takes c4 is just crushing. So white maybe goes f3, trying to take this knight out of the game. So f takes e5, f takes e4, and bishop takes e4 check, king f2, and it seems like white may just survive. One more move, bishop e2, rook d1, and he's doing okay, but here it comes, rook f8 check, king g3, bishop e1 check, king h3, bishop e6 check, g4 forced move, rook f3 check, king g2 forced, rook f2 check, king g1 forced, and now rook takes b2. So this is one line that shows how black simply sacrifices a pawn but gets activity in return, and then now you see how it's all turned out in black's favor. So let's go back to that position where we played bishop e6, we had a knight on c6 and a knight on e5. In this position, there's pawns here on a3, b4, and c4, bishop on b2, there's a knight on e4, and in this position we tried king e1, where it was refuted by knight takes on b4. So instead of king e1, let's say knight takes c6. Now bishop takes c4 doesn't really work, because let's say bishop takes c4, king e1, and now white's threatening bishop takes c4, but he's also threatening knight takes e7 with check. So this doesn't work in black's favor. So black can just take back the knight here, and he's still threatening the pawn on c4. And now white has no defense, because he can't really protect this pawn. If king e1 in this position, then simply a5. and this whole queen side is just going to collapse. If pawn takes, you can see this rook, the file is opened up, the b file is opened up for the rook here, and then rook takes a5 is coming. This is going to be really horrible, and moves like knight d6, knight c5 are also available in this position. And if c5 instead, then again simply a5, and white's gonna suffer a lot in this position. So that's what happens after bishop b2. So let's go back to this position where we had a pawn on d6 and white's queen was here, and white tried to defend the pawn with bishop b2, but that doesn't work, as we have seen. So the other move, and which is very obvious, is e takes d6. And now here, when I analyze this position with the computer, I found an absolutely incredible move which I had not even considered. I would have considered maybe bishop takes d6, maybe even bishop f6, knight takes d6. That doesn't make much sense, but okay, bishop d6, bishop f6 makes some sense. Not queen d6. I don't really want to trade queens yet. But the computer played a move which really shocked me. It was bishop h4. It's crazy, this move, and the reason it works is because white's king is on e2. If the king was on e1, then this move would have just been kicked out with g3, and it's just a waste. But because the king's on e2, a move like g3 doesn't really work in this position, because black simply goes bishop g4, and if pawn takes bishop, then believe it or not, queen takes pawn here, attacking f2, and there's really no way to defend f2 then playing queen e1. But then bishop takes f3 check, king takes, knight e5 check, king e2, queen g4 check, f3, queen takes f3 is mate. So it's incredible how quickly white lost in this line. So let's go back to this position. Bishop h4 and bishop on c8. So we saw g3 and bishop g4. So g takes h4 doesn't work, as we've seen. But if bishop g2, then black goes queen f6. Now he's attacking the rook and also threatening knight e5 in some lines, and white really cannot stop both threats in this position. If rook a2, then knight e5, and it's just crushing. There's no defense to this knight on d2. If knight d2, then black just takes first on d2 and then takes on f3. And once f3 falls, it's not hard to see that white's position is going to collapse here. So instead, let's say if after queen f6, black tries move like queen c2, trying to trick white in this position. What can we do here in this position? Queen takes a1, bishop b2, queen a2, and now the problem is white still has to regain his material. And let's say if pawn takes h4, right? There's this excellent move knight e5 in this position. Note that white cannot really take on e4 because b2 is hanging, but what else can he do? If knight d2, he just takes, and then c4 falls. c4 is already under threat. So let's say if queen takes e4, and then queen takes b2 with check, and knight d2 in this position. And now well, black can actually just go rook e8 if he wants to, and white doesn't really have, I don't see white's threats in the position. But let's see a more concrete line here. If bishop takes f3, then white has to take with the bishop, and then if knight takes, and then queen has to take, and then simply c takes d6, and white has a rook for a knight, and I'm sorry, black has a rook for a knight, and this is not a good position for white at all. So these are some sample lines in the g3 variation. Of course, I'm showing you some lines that are more human lines. If you analyze with the computer, you will see much more complex machine-like lines, but I'm not showing you those lines. I'm showing you lines which are good lines, but are also understandable to human beings. So, okay, this position now back to position where we had with bishop h4, bishop stuck on a1, knight on e4, and rook on a1. So we saw that g3 is refuted by bishop h4. What else? Black's threatening knight takes f2 in this position. If, for example, if white chooses to ignore the threat and he just plays something like bishop b2, then knight takes f2, queen e1, and still bishop g4. And now the problem is white's pieces are just coming out too fast, and rook's going to come on e8, he's going to attack on e3, rook on h1 is threatened, and there's just too many threats for white to deal with in this position. So this knight takes f2 move, once black gets this move here in this position, because this king is awkwardly placed in on e2, it's really hard for white to get out of the mess that he is in. So we're only going to consider lines here that deal with protecting f2. Okay, so bishop c8, back to where we were. Bishop h4, we saw g3 doesn't work. Now we still want to protect h4, so the next obvious move seems to be knight takes h4, and now queen takes h4, still threatening the pawn. Now if g3, then queen f6, now he's attacking f2 as well as the rook on a1, and that's game over. So g3 is not possible. If f3, well then simply queen f2 check, king d3, and here even move like knight e5 check, king takes e4, queen h4 check. If king takes e5, then queen f6, bishop f5 check. White's going to lose very quickly in this position. And if f4, then knight g4, now he's threatening knight f2, he's also threatening knight f6, rook e8, and all other kinds of crazy threats in this position. White won't survive in this line. So f3 is not really a move here. You can definitely check this with the computer. In fact, computer shows that rook e8 is even better than queen f2 check, because black's not really afraid of f takes e4, because bishop g4 check wins the queen. But I'm showing you more human lines which are easy to understand. So okay, f3 not possible, g3 not possible. The only move that's left is queen e1. And now here, what was the idea that I was looking at? Knight takes f2 with the idea of bishop g4 check. So if queen takes, then knight d4 check. And now if let's say pawn takes knight and bishop g4 check. Problem for white here is that his queen needs to be supported against the queen's attack from h4, but white is running out of moves here. If king e3, then simply rook e8 and the king has to move away and queen takes queen. If king e1, then again rook e8, and the king, if king moves, queen takes, and if bishop moves, rook takes anyway, check and winning the queen. So that's the idea with the knight d4 check. And if he doesn't take, let's say he doesn't take on d4, he still has to go, he has to go king e1 in this position. Here black can probably go knight c2 check, and the queen is still pinned, so he cannot take the knight. And after king e2, well, bishop g4 check, and now he finally loses the queen because the king cannot protect the queen anymore. So we're back to this position. Knight's on e4, pawn on f2, and we had a trade on h4. And after queen takes, we've seen g3 doesn't work, f3 doesn't work, even queen e1 doesn't work in the position. So white's just lost. So knight takes h4, not a possible move. So what's left? What can white do? We saw g3, we saw knight takes h4, don't work. There's a final try in the position, which is d takes c7, which is an interesting trap. Notice, by the way, that white has won 3 pawns so far. Now the trap is if queen takes d1 check, king takes d1. We saw this line earlier, right? Knight takes f2 check, king e2, knight takes h1, winning an exchange. Not in this position. Knight takes h4, and suddenly we realize that this knight is going to get trapped here in this position. White's knight is going to come back, and then white has a bishop for a bishop, knight for a knight, rook for a rook, and then he'll have rook, he'll have a bishop and a knight for this knight. This knight is going to get lost very soon, and he has equal number of pawns right now, an extra pawn on c7, which is extremely bad for black to deal with, because it avoids, it protects against rook d8 ideas, and it's also a pawn that's just about to queen. So this would not be good. So that's the trap in this position. D takes c7. So black cannot take on d1 here in this position. So the next logical move is queen to f6. Now he's threatening queen takes a1. He's also threatening knight takes on f2, and if knight takes h4, queen takes h4, it simply transposes into the lines that we saw after queen takes h4. The take on c7 doesn't really affect the evaluation of the position in that variation. g3 doesn't work, as we have seen. Queen e1 doesn't work, as we have seen. Also the rook on a1 is hanging in this position. So if, let's say, rook a2, then knight takes f2, queen e1. The point of queen e1 is that if knight takes on h1, then white's hoping to take on h4. And then after this trade, white's trying to get in the same kind of position where he has 2 pieces for a rook, and then he's going to trap this knight. So that's the idea with queen e1 in this position. But here, instead of knight takes, bishop g4, extremely powerful move. And now the problem is, now he's really threatening knight takes h1, because now if queen takes h4, then this knight is pinned to the king, and black can simply take the queen, and white can't recapture. So now white's in some serious trouble in this position. If, say, rook g1, trying to save that rook, then look at this. Bishop takes f3, check. G takes f3. Knight d4 check. If king d2, knight takes f3 check, wins the queen. So e takes d4, and black here has time simply to take the pawn on d4. Queen takes d4, and queen d3 mate is threatened. Also rook e8 check is threatened, and white does not have a defense in this position. It's just completely lost. Take a minute or so, you'll see that there is no defense. Bishop e3, queen d3 mate. Knight moves, queen d3 mate still. So this is completely busted in this position. So after queen f6, we've seen rook a2. Rook a2 doesn't work in that position. So let's go back. On e3, knight's here, knight here. Queen f6. Am I missing anything? Bishop on c8. That's right. So rook a2 doesn't work. Knight takes h4 doesn't work. There's a queen on d1. The only try that's left in the position is queen c2. Now this is a very clever idea again. If queen takes a1, then bishop b2, queen a2, and now knight takes h4. And with this, white is slowly getting back into the game. In fact, white's actually better in this position because black's pieces are not able to generate any play here. This bishop, maybe it'll go to e6, but c4 is guarded for the moment. White can even play a move like king e1, securing that pawn, and then he can think of kicking this knight out or just bring this knight back. Bishop e2, knight d2, and white's queen is really awkwardly placed. If this knight is kicked out in some lines, then knight c3 could actually trap the queen here. So this line in this position, queen c2 is a threat that it's a trap that asks white to take on a1, but asks black to take on a1, but black should not take on a1. Instead, black should simply take on f2 with the same idea. Bishop g4 is coming next, and then rook on e8, and there's always knight d4 ideas in the game after you have rook d8, because then you have fork on d4. So after this, I'm just going to give you a sample line. Let's say bishop b2 attacking the queen, queen h6, no problem. And here, let's say knight takes h4. Now there's a very subtle point to this. Point is that if queen takes h4, now white can play g3, and there's no way to protect this knight. He's lost. If bishop g4 checked, then just king takes f2. Black doesn't have a good check in this position. Queen g4 check, king takes f2, and white's winning. So that's the idea with knight takes h4. And after knight takes h1, white is hoping that he can trap this knight after a move like knight f3. But in fact, it's not possible because bishop g4, and now, oddly enough, the threat in the position is queen takes h2. So let's say if white goes knight c3, which is the best move in the position, queen takes h2. And now this knight is free to go out. And black, as you can see, black is ahead material here. This pawn on c7 is going to fall. White's king is not safe on e2. And this is just a good position for black. Even though white, after a move like knight d5, can maybe put some resistance here in this position, but it's still a position that's much in black's favor. Finally, if instead of knight c3, let's say here in this position, white, where was I? Okay. White tries a move like h3, but then that simply allows knight g3 check. And after king f2, black can just take these pieces, and he's still ahead in material. So we have seen in this position, after e takes d6 and bishop h4, after this position here. After d6, which is the correct way to try to refute this king e2 idea, we've seen bishop b2 doesn't really work. We've seen he takes d6 and then bishop h4, and in these lines g3, knight takes, or d takes c7, all these ideas don't really work for white. So the conclusion is that this line refutes this whole king e2 idea. But that's not the end of the story. I'm gonna leave you with this thought here, that after black castled in this position here, after black castled here in this position, white played a3, which is fine, bishop e7, and then white tried to play b4 and bishop b2, but this move b4, it opened up this diagonal to the queen later on, and this rook was really exposed in many of the lines. So here obviously there's room for improvement for white in this position, and a move which I have looked at is queen c2, and this is not easy for black to refute, although I still think that black's definitely better in this position because of white's compromised king position, but he is not clearly better, and he still has to figure out his way to exploit white's king position here. So queen c2 is an idea that maybe you can explore at home. I hope you have enjoyed this video on this king e2 idea, and I look forward to making videos on more interesting ideas in the future.